Hello and welcome back to Calm AF. I'm Kristen Finch. This is episode 316, and we are today in part 2 of a 3-part series where I'm breaking down the key differences between two types of people, two identities that look really similar on the outside, but are very, very different on the inside. We are talking about the differences between hypervigilant achievers and Calm AF high performers. In part 1, I talked about the big differences in their daily routines and shared how very uncomplicated a high performer's routine looks versus a hypervigilant achiever. The reason being, a high performer is just getting done what needs to get done. I need to move my body. I need to manage my thoughts. I need to take care of my soul. Here's how I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to get on with my day. Where a hypervigilant achiever complicate things. They're always looking for a different, maybe this kind of a meditation, or maybe this kind of journaling, or maybe this, because they believe that the key to their success is something outside of them. It's hinging on having a perfect routine. I want to be happy, so I need to find a morning routine that's going to help me get happy, or they need to find a hack. So that was part 1. In parts 2 and 3, I am going to be diving way deeper into what I think are the biggest mindset and behavioral and identity differences between the hyperachiever and the high performer. If this series, or really any of Calm AF, grabs you by the face and shows you where you are still just hustling, trying to get calm, trying to get happy, working so hard, you're still operating from that hypervigilant, dysregulated energy, then you are definitely going to want to grab my brand new audio series. It's a private podcast. It's called Hyperachiever to High Performer. And it's teaching you how to not just be, but stay calm AF and regulated. This is completely free. You just need to subscribe. It works exactly like a regular podcast. If you've never had a private podcast before, however you're listening to me right now is how you are going to listen to the private podcast. The only difference is that it's private, which means if you are in your Apple podcast app or your Spotify or wherever you listen, you can't search for hyperachiever to high performer. You won't be able to find it. You have to subscribe. And you just do that by clicking on a link. Now, this series will go live on April 8th. In the show notes right now, there is a link where you can get on the list so that as soon as it's live, you get it. You will get an email saying, hey, your subscription's ready, and you are off. You get the whole audio series. Inside the series, I'm diving way deep into this topic, helping you move forward. So if you are listening and you're like, I want more than just awareness and information, I want to go deeper, make sure you grab this free private podcast. Okay, let's dive in to part 2. I have spent years coaching high performers, or I guess more accurately, I should say, I have spent years coaching hypervigilant achievers learn to become Calm AF high performers. Now, I didn't think that this was who I was going to end up working with when I first started. It wasn't my original plan. When I started coaching, I was mostly working with neurotypical women who are in neurodiverse marriages, which I still do have a lot of these clients. But over time, what I noticed as I was working with this specific dynamic, I started noticing that there was a very similar pattern. Like I could predict before I even talked to a person what kind of person they were. It didn't matter if they were in their 60s or their 20s. It didn't matter if they lived here or there. None of it mattered. They had the same kind of origin story. So what I found was these women, most of the time it was women, like 99%, they were the go-to person in every area of their life. They were the best at everything. They were the person that everyone went to. They were the top students. They were the best daughters. Everyone's like, oh, she's the best. She's the best friend. She's the best mom. She's the best this, that. They were all following the rules. And I'm using air quotes around rules. These arbitrary rules that a lot of us try to follow. So we have our little rule book of how to be a good fill in the blank, how to be a good girl, how to be a good wife, how to be a good student, how to be a good friend. So we take these rules and we followed them. And we exceeded expectations. We weren't just a good girl, we were the best. We weren't just a good student, we were like being handed the keys to the school because we were so good. We checked all the boxes. Now, when they came to me for their neurodiverse marriage, they were exhausted, they were empty, and they were just kind of like surviving. And most of them were feeling pretty resentful because all of the work they had done all of their life to create the success, to create the best this, the best that, it wasn't working here. And they didn't know what to do about that, right? They were constantly managing, pushing, overthinking in their life to become the best at whatever, believing that more effort was the key to success. But here it wasn't working. And they were seeing more and more that even in these other areas, the life they actually wanted, one where success actually felt fulfilling, where they actually could work hard and then relax, it wasn't accessible through the way they were doing it because they couldn't see any exit strategy. They couldn't figure out how to get out of this hypervigilance. Once they made the shift, so once we started working together, the way I work with my clients who are in neurodiverse marriages, especially back then, was, your marriage is what it is, but what we're going to do first is we are going to just pause on all of the working on all the things, and we're going to pull it back and we're going to just look at you. We're going to see what's going on with you, see how you can start making shifts just within yourself instead of trying to focus so heavily on making shifts in your marriage. And this was oftentimes met with resistance, but for the ones who are like, you know what, I'm in, I will listen. What they noticed was things felt better very quickly. Not necessarily because anything had changed, but at the same time, everything kind of felt like it was changing. So they would start coming to sessions and say, I know we're here to really talk about my marriage, but here's what's happening in the rest of my life. Like I had a boundary, or I set a boundary with my mom, which I've never done in my life. And I actually followed through on it. Or at work, they were oftentimes really successful in their work. And they were like, all of a sudden, I am making these power moves. I'm getting promotions. They were making more money, but they were doing it differently than they had ever done it before. They weren't doing it through pushing or overworking or raising their hand and volunteering for everything or being the one that everything gets dumped on. They were seeing differences. They were hitting their health goals. Like somehow, when I stopped making this a big deal, all of a sudden I'm hitting my health goals without obsessing. And yes, of course, their relationships changed. Sometimes improved, sometimes they changed because they simply felt better. And so the relationship didn't feel as bad. Why would this be? Well, because when you stop running or operating from a hypervigilant, dysregulated state, and you start seeing that I can do whatever I want to do, but from a regulated state instead, everything is going to get easier. of course, everything's going to get easier. If you show up and you have a goal, you have a deadline, and you don't feel like it's urgent and everything in the world is going to collapse if you don't do it right now and best and perfectly, of course, it's going to feel better. So that's kind of how I started noticing. Now, I coined the term for this hyperachiever. I call it an energy manager. And it really is just someone who goes, it's like a people pleaser times 1,000. It's like a combo of an overachiever, people pleaser, perfectionist, someone who really wants to control the moods. But I have been working with hyperachievers for a very long time. So I wrote down just recently, I wrote in a notebook all of the things. If I was going to look at like a before picture and an after picture, what are the biggest differences? And not necessarily on the outside, just because hyperachievers are still also very successful. They're just exhausted and resentful. High performers are not. So what is the difference? How does that happen? So I'm just going to start. I had a very long list. I narrowed it down to 10. And now for this, I'm squishing it even more because I could go on and on. But if you want to go deeper, like I said, make sure you are signed up to get that private podcast. Okay. The first way that I think is one of the biggest differences between these two is that hyperachievers think busy is productive and high performers, no, that's not necessarily true. So a hypervigilant achiever, they pack their schedules, they stack their calendars. There is no breathing room anywhere to be seen. And they are measuring success by how much they're doing. So, for example, if I were to ask you at the end of your day, how successful was your day on a scale of 1 to 10? And your first thought is, how much did I get done today? Did I get everything checked off my to-do list? You might be a hyperachiever. Now, why do we feel this way? I think it's very obvious. I don't need to go into a lot of details. You are smart, you are observant, because that's what we're told. We are told that busy is important. And it's celebrated, right? Oh, I worked for 12 straight hours today. Wow, good for you. You were really productive. High performers know that those two things aren't the same thing. High performers do not think busy equals productive. Now, I work with high performers. My private clients who I work with one-on-one, they are high performers. I have seen their schedules. I have seen their calendars. I am not suggesting they are not busy, but what they are busy with is things that are productive. And what high performers know is that productive doesn't just mean doing. High performers know that some of the most important things on their list, some of the most productive tasks on their to-do list are things like rest, have downtime, go on a walk, because it allows them to get into their zone of genius. They understand that activity does not mean impact, right? They don't worship how much time I spent on something or how busy I was or how many little things I did today. They prioritize the outcomes because high performers know that busy isn't a flex. If my high performers know and they see their schedule and there is just no breathing room and no time and no space within it, and I am not talking hours, right? I am talking just the fact that it's on their schedule. If they don't have that, it's a big red flag for them. They are going to be looking at, what am I doing that is just spinning wheels? What do I need to be delegating? What needs to come off of my schedule? Because I do not need, at the level I am working at, I do not need to just be busy doing like emails and, this and that, things that are just spinning wheels. They want to spend their time doing things productive, and being productive means being in their zone of genius, doing things that actually move the needle. So that's the first one. The second big difference is that high achievers complicate and high performers simplify. I talked quite a bit about this one in the first part of the series in talking about their routines. But oftentimes, hypervigilant achievers are adding layers or extra steps or unnecessary details, kind of in the same way it's like busy. They are thinking more effort, more time spent on something equals more value. So if I have something that needs to be done and I spend 20 minutes on it, but I could spend 2 hours on it, then I think 2 hours is going to be a better result, right? Because more time, more effort equals more value, which is not true. Oftentimes, it's so interesting how untrue it is. High performers know that the value isn't in the amount of time spent, it's in the impact. The shift from high achiever to high performer isn't necessarily about doing less or taking less time to do things. It's about trusting that simple is usually the best answer. Simple is enough. More detail, more explanation, more effort. High achievers think complexity is important, but my high performers, they don't want that. They don't have time for that. That is not something productive on their calendar. Like, they don't want your 3-page, very complicated, in 1,000 words to say something that you could have said in 1 sentence. High performers aren't looking at a long, complicated thing thinking that's better. They're probably looking at it thinking that's inefficient. Now, what's interesting about this is that when I have a client who comes to me to work together for the first time, this is something I really have to train my hypervigilant high achievers, energy managers on. Because when we start talking about how I work with them, they're like, well, how many hours? Do we get 1 hour a week, every other week? Do we get, how many weeks do we get? Blah, blah, blah. Because again, they are in a hypervigilant achiever mindset. So they think I need every detail so that I can give them the best coaching. But I'm a high performance coach. I don't need an hour. I can shift you in a minute. And it's so uncomfortable. I have so many of my clients, when they first start with me, they're like, no, I really think I need, I promise you don't. You do not need more time to get an important, impactful result. The third difference that we're going to talk about today, and then next week, I'm going to go into what I think are the 2 biggest differences as far as impact on your life. But the third for today is that high achievers or hyperachievers overthink, and high performers take action and adjust. Now, I am specifically here talking about making decisions, but just in general, hypervigilant achievers are very much overthinkers. Hypervigilant achievers mentally rehearse everything. They are thinking. If they need to make a decision, they are analyzing. They are writing pros and cons. They are playing out every single scenario and in bringing in every single person that might be involved. And if I say this to this person, then they might feel this way. But if I say this, then that person might feel. So many things that they are trying to think of, trying to make sure they make the perfect decision. Why? Because deep down, they don't believe they can handle how it will feel if they make a decision and it's the wrong one, or if they make a decision and someone gets upset, or if they make a decision and they fail. They don't know how to feel their feelings. They don't know how to handle discomfort. So they procrastinate, they wait, and they procrastinate by overthinking. I'm going to just keep thinking. Let me just think a little longer. This is something else my private clients, when someone comes to me and wants to work with me privately, and I never want to feel anyone to feel rushed, but when, we'll talk and then we'll say, oh, let's you go have a think and then we'll talk tomorrow, And then they're like, oh, I need to think a little longer. I need to think a little longer. I'm like, this is a hypervigilant way of making a decision. This is a dysregulated decision-making process. You're just afraid to make a decision that you aren't capable of handling if something goes wrong. Where high performers, when it comes to decision-making, they are moving. They will think about something. Also, something I talk more about in my private podcast. I go deeper in there with, especially around decisions. But when you are a Calm AF regulated operating system, you are able to move past the fear and you are able to hear intuition and access your higher level thinking, which hypervigilant achievers don't. You cannot access your highest level thinking from a dysregulated energy. You cannot hear your intuition when your body is screaming that you are in an emergency. So when someone comes to me and says, hey, I just need a little more time, no. Here's how you make a decision like a high performer. You think about it, you listen to your intuition, you tap into like what you already know, and then you make a decision and then you take action. You do whatever it is you decide. And then you are able to see, okay, I did that thing. Did it work? Awesome. Did it not? Do I need to tweak something? Do I need to change something? Do we just need to scrap this all together and start over? So a high performer is taking a lot of action. They are starting before they feel ready, before they know for sure what the right decision is. They aren't afraid of making the wrong decision because they know that what's worse than making the wrong decision? Making no decision. That's just going to take so much longer. Where a high performer is like decide, act, evaluate, decide, act, evaluate. A hyperachiever is like think, then make a decision, and then procrastinate that probably a little more before you take an action. So the high performer has already gone through probably 30 steps before a hyperachiever has made one. A high performer is not afraid to make the wrong decision. That's the difference. Okay. That's where we're going to leave off today. If any of this called you out, good. That means you know what you need to do. You know you're ready to shift. The first easy step, make sure you sign up for that free private podcast, Hyperachiever to High Performer. I'm going to break down all of these shifts and more. I'm going to tell you how to start making this shift. And what I want you to do now, your takeaway for today, is to use what you learned today and just put a Calm AF high performer mindset on top of it. So you learned a lot of things, right? Where you still are probably operating from a hypervigilant state. A hypervigilant mindset approach to this thinks, oh my God, that's me. I knew it. Now I have 1,000 things to fix. I need to make a plan, need to research, need to figure out what to do. That's a hypervigilant approach to making this shift. A high performance Calm AF thought sounds like, got it. These hypervigilant patterns sound familiar. I see what I need to do in order to start shifting. What's the simplest step I can take right now to shift? That's how a high performer takes that information. Do you see the difference? Your job isn't to add this to your ways I'm not good enough. It's to take one simple step forward. All right? You know what to do. Don't overthink it. Go do it.